everyone, and welcome to our very first episode of Policy Bytes. I'm Courtney Nickerson, head of community for Nirmata, the creators of the Kyverno project, and I'm really excited to be launching this podcast with all of you. We created Policy Bytes to have a space where we can dig into some of the most important themes and topics shaping the cloud native space right now. Things like policy as code, of course, Kubernetes governance, platform engineering, and how can we possibly leave out AI? It's shaping and reshaping everything that we build, operate, and govern in technology today. So this podcast is going to be about more of those, more than just tools and features. It's going to be about all of those themes, and above all, it's going to be about the challenges that people are solving. So we're going to be joined, most importantly, by a lot of people who are out there in the wild doing very important things. I couldn't imagine a better person to be watching this podcast with than my co-host and boss, Jim Bourgeois. Jim, before we start chatting with our amazing maintainer guest today, can you share a little bit about who you are and why you thought that this podcast would be important to create?
Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, my pleasure, and welcome everyone. Great to be here and launch this podcast with Courtney. So, like Courtney mentioned, I'm Jim. I'm one of the co-founders at Nirmata. Also one of the co-creators of Kyverno, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just a little bit about myself. I'm a software engineer, still pretty hands-on with different aspects of our product. Not so much. I've been watching with Kyverno. I think I'm still maybe in the top 10 or so contributors, but from much further down the list than I was before. But building a lot of different things around Kyverno, and still very involved in, of course, the governance and some of the features and direction of the project. My background is as a software engineer. Started my career in places like Motorola, Bell Labs, Lucent, where I worked on telecom software back in the late 90s, early 2000. And then moved to data networking as well as various startups in the Silicon Valley area, and eventually ended up founding Nirmata with Damien and Ritesh, my co-founders.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for your background. And that brings me to a very important question from telecom and everything else in your background. What brought you to Kyverno? Can you tell us a little bit about the origin story? Because that is the heart of what we're doing this day and age.
Absolutely. Yeah, so interestingly, all through my career, I've worked more or less in what you could call regulated industries, right? I remember when I started at Bell Labs, they put everybody through a 3-month training, regardless of your role or position, on what telecom meant to the world. And, the emphasis was how important it was to be networked. These days, we, of course, take, like wireless phone calls for granted, or communication for granted over the internet. But back then it was still very early days of those technologies. It seemed fairly exciting if you could get a cellular phone call completed, right? Because this was just like with things like CDMA and digital telephony. Those were very new technologies back then. But the real emphasis was how critical, mission critical that software was. And really what they emphasized is that lives depended on it, right? And if your software wasn't working correctly, there would be not only lack of business but potentially impact to human lives. And that really struck me as a new software engineer. And I always felt that being able to use software in that mission critical or business critical manner made a was not only a big challenge but also a powerful thing to pursue. And that's where, if you kind of look at how things have evolved, of course, with the internet and with Kubernetes and with other things, some of the patterns and best practices we've brought into that space is because of that background with regulated industries, with business critical software. And something we learned in those domains was that policy and governance is very important, right? It's something security and policy is not an afterthought, but it's something you bake into the system at every layer from the very beginning. And, we saw that there was a gap in the Kubernetes space in the early days, and that's where we wanted to, bring in Kyverno. So interestingly, Kyverno started in our commercial product in Nirmata itself. A lot of open source projects start as standalone projects, and then eventually become commercial products, we went the other way. We had launched a commercial platform. Kyverno was part of it. And then eventually, as the CNCF matured, as Kubernetes matured, we saw the opportunity to make that Kyverno into an admission controller. The first version was written in Java, and it ran in our SaaS platform. But then we rewrote it completely in Golang, made it an admission controller, and donated it to CNCF.
That is quite the journey to get to where we are today, which makes it even more exciting to talk about the guests that are joining us. Because today we have the maintainer team from the Kyverno project that is donated to the CNCF, currently incubating on its way to graduation. We're all working in that direction. And so I think the first person we should start off with here is introducing Shuting. Welcome to the first Policy Bytes podcast.
Thank you, Courtney. I'm so glad. And hi, everyone. I'm Shudang, a Kyverno maintainer and working on Nirmata.
Now, it would be wonderful if you would share with us, because as head maintainer, how did you actually first become interested in policy as code, let alone jumping in as a maintainer in a project like Kyverno?
Yeah, like as Jim mentioned, Kyverno started as a Nirmata internal project, and later on we donated to CNCF. The time I got into policy as code, found it interesting as while managing all the Kubernetes resource manifests and definitions are quite complex. As it became more and more dynamic, it was clear that we needed a systematic way or approach to manage policies. And policy as code, by its name, it let us write policy as code and making them easy to version, to test and integrate into our CI/CD pipelines, which I think fits perfectly with the modern DevOps practices.
So, as head maintainer, what is actually your main focus and responsibility on the project?
Mostly, I'm trying to keep the project healthy and growing. By that, it means try to, ensuring all the incoming contributions are in code quality, and we're trying to maintain and create a welcoming community with your help, Courtney, especially. Thank you. For all the new contributors, as you know, we're quite interactive on the Kyverno public Slack channels. We host community meetings weekly to welcome all the new contributors and trying to review and triage all the pending contributions. So that's one of the most focusing on what I'm trying to work on now. And then I guess the other part of the work is to align the project's direction with what users needed. This especially when we hear use cases from community, either Slack or GitHub, and we want to make sure the projects are well aligned with the user's request. And we're trying to also, make things happening in the industry. So making sure we stay as a strong and relevant tool for managing policies.
So, taking a step back and thinking about the use cases that you hear from people, especially for a project like Kyverno, and now entering the era of AI, how do you see Kyverno helping platform teams put the right guardrails into place now that they have so many AI components going around?
Yeah, I guess some of the most heard use cases through either Slack or the KubeCon in person was that, okay, where can I find all the violations or what's the best way to remediate those, right? And in the AR area, the systems are smarter but more complex. So policies here are critical for security and compliance. And Kyverno acts as a powerful policy engine for Kubernetes and beyond Kubernetes because we expand to the cell-based policy expressions. You can create policies that validate AI model deployments, trying to enforce data privacy and block unauthorized access. So that gives team clear feedback to catch issues early. So they can focus on the project, the innovation things, while Kyverno handles all the security heavy lifting things.
And we're actually moving into an AI space, right? Kyverno has an MCP server, which seems like a really big milestone for the project. Why is that important for people to know about, and how can teams leverage that to kind of simplify their governance?
Well, yeah, I think Kyverno MCP server is a big deal. Everybody's trying to make their own MCP server. And we, as a policy engine, it specifically centralizes the policy management. And I would say making policy governance much easier. Like the use cases I mentioned, we have the automatic way to remediate the policy violations given your Kubernetes cluster or your resource manifest. We don't need to necessarily connect to your cluster to give that. The MCP server can connect to whatever the cluster without installing it and on your cluster. And that gives you the whole scan reports and all the remediation required, the suggestions.
So before we have Jim introduce our next guest, looking ahead, shooting, what are you most excited about in the roadmap right now?
Right. We're in the release of 1.16 Kyverno, and as I mentioned, we have expanded beyond Kubernetes with our latest cell-based new policies. So we're really looking for feedback from the broader cloud-native ecosystem, multi-cloud and non-Kubernetes platforms. And we're also trying to publish Kyverno SDK so the user can access Kyverno engine however they want. And on the AI side, we're also diving into AI-powered policy suggestions that learn from environments, predict violations, and enable intelligent remediation in real time.
Yeah, one thing on the AI topic, right? I was at one of the KCDs, I think it was KCD New York. There was a VP of infrastructure from a large company in a panel session, and they said something very interesting, right? They said with AI now, developers can start taking on some of the platform responsibilities like creating Terraform and writing infrastructure as code or managing infrastructure. And this is something that they're seeing that's impossible to stop, right? It's going to happen. But what they're concerned about is how do they then, put in the right governance? How do they make sure that's correct and valid? And how can, before things go into production, how do they ensure, that, things are compliant to their organization as well as industry standard? So for her, like what was really important was, this transition from manual management and, even today, like tickets going to the platform team and the platform team developing some IAC to empowering developers for that next level of, self-service. And the other point is with AI, of course, there's going to be more software created than ever before. Some statistic I read is like in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see more software than the last 30 years combined. So again, that's more strain on the platform team, which is where empowering them with the right AI tools becomes super important. Let's continue with Mary. Miriam, would love to hear in your words a little bit about your, Kyverno story and how you got started with the project and how you've been contributing to Kyverno itself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mariam Fahmi. I'm working as a software engineer at Nirmata, and I'm one of the Kyverno maintainers. So I would say that all started in my previous job when I was working as a DevOps engineer. We were struggling to enforce the best practices in our Kubernetes clusters, and we were looking for something that could automate these best practices for us, and that's how we came across Kyverno. So what stood out immediately is that how Kubernetes native it is. It makes use of custom resource definitions, admission controllers, and the policies itself are written in YAML. So there was no new language to learn, and this was really easy and straightforward to get started because this was exactly what we needed at that time. And I got very excited as I learned more about Kyverno, and this led me to apply for the LFX mentorship program with Kyverno, of course. And since then, I have, continued contributing to the project, and that's how I ended up deeply involved in the policy as code. Currently, my main focus is on the new policy types, like, the validating policies, mutating policies, and all these policy types that support cell expressions. This is the direction Kubernetes itself is taking, and we want to follow that path. So policies are unified and consistent. And the idea is that there should be just one clear way to enforce a best practice. That's why we moved to introduce new policy types that make use of these cell expressions. And we are also working to make these policies more user-friendly while keeping them simple, because in Kyverno, we believe that policies should be easy to read and easy to write. And besides the technical work, I also spend time helping new contributors get started and contribute to the Kyverno code base and supporting the community, which has always been a big part of what makes Kyverno really powerful.
You've also done, I mean, you started as the LFX mentee. You've also now done a couple of mentorships yourself, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Very cool. Yeah, so shooting made some really good points on AI. And how do you see AI is changing how platform teams operate?
So AI is making platforms faster, more productive, and even more complex. So it changes everything and accelerates how we build systems, which is very incredible, of course. But when things move that quickly, we need policy as code to make sure we follow the security best practices and teams don't end up with hidden costs. So I would say in this new era, policies become more critical. It's not optional anymore. And at the same time, AI can actually, help us working with the policies easier with the AI assistance. And even we can spot or fix violations very fast, and we can automate these things. So I would say that the combination of AI speeding things up and the policies keeping those things safe is really powerful.
Good balance. It seems like, of course, both are going to be necessary.
Yeah.
Yeah, so from everything going on in Kyverno, what's like the most exciting feature for you that's coming up?
There are actually two things. So I'm really excited about the Kyverno MCP server, and I'm really excited to see how it's going to boost productivity and how it will make things easier and more straightforward for the teams, which is exactly what we are aiming for. And the second thing is that I'm also looking forward to the new cell policy types. I hope that they become the new foundation for all use cases. And I'm really excited to see how users will adopt them in real scenarios, because writing effective cell expressions not only to solve real problems, it will not only help users to solve real problems, but it will also give us valuable feedback on how to make cell even more user-friendly and aligned with what people need.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And Cell or Common Expressions language, has now become a standard in Kubernetes, right? So when Kyverno started, there was no de facto policy language or expression language within Kubernetes. But now that that's present, it completely makes sense for Kyverno to adopt that. Yeah, and I think if I recall correctly from the last release blog, just switching policy types in Kyverno from Jamespath to Cell, and from our previous, declaration or declarative language to Cell is like a 40 to 60% performance increase, right? So very, very exciting. Awesome. So you're going to also be hosting the KyvernoCon event, which is upcoming, right, Miriam? Any exciting things you can share about that?
So I'm really excited about the community energy that will happen at KyvernoCon. For me, it's more about hearing how different teams are using Kyverno in real-world scenarios and how they are solving problems with policies in creative ways. And there are also many great talks lined up, and I'm personally looking forward to learning from them myself, as it's really good chance to celebrate the community, share the knowledge, and get inspired by all the ways Kyverno is being applied.
So grateful that you're going to be helping to co-host the event, Miriam. And for anyone who hasn't heard, we do have virtual KyvernoCon. It's free. Register. If you don't have time to attend live in person, You can always watch the recordings afterwards, so please do feel free to join that event. It's co-hosted by CNCF, so the registration link is live on their website. That brings us to Charles Edouard. Lovely for you to join us today. You've seen firsthand a lot of different aspects teams struggle with, everything from policies for platform engineers to testing different things. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in the Kyverno project and why policy as code is important to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Charles-Edouard Bretéché. I joined the Kyverno project and the maintainers team a couple of years ago, and I'm working as a staff engineer at Nirmata since 3 years, I think. To me, starting working on Kyverno and policy as code was really an opportunity. I was spending time at some point looking at open source projects I could learn just to improve my knowledge and my culture with different tools. At this time, I didn't know much about policy and policy engines, so I started looking around. I looked at other policy engines before I found Kyverno, and the simplicity, the usability of Kyverno was really interesting. I wanted to learn more. So I just had ideas for contributing. I started getting in touch with the maintainer teams. We got closer and closer, and finally I was offered to become a maintainer myself. So that's how it really started. It was just for learning purposes, and it was so fun that I finally stayed. And I've been doing policy as code for 3 years now. I almost do nothing else now.
As so many love stories, it happened unexpectedly.
Definitely.
That's great. Tell us a little bit about the most impactful contributions you've made, because there's a little tool out there called Chainsaw as part of the Kyverno project that people seem to be huge fans of. So tell us a little bit about that.
So Chainsaw started as a side project. We needed a tool to run end-to-end tests on Kyverno. So we started with another tool that is now unmaintained, and this other tool lacked a lot of features we needed to Kyverno just to make sure that the project we were building was behaving correctly and did what we expected it to do. So we started with this old project. We tried to join forces with the maintainers of this project, but we never really succeeded. So with a mentee, during an LFX mentorship, we decided to create our own tool based on similar ideas from the old tools, but to fix all the things we needed or to implement all the features we needed. We started with an open source project, so it was open source from the first commit. And yeah, it helped us solve a lot of bugs and issues in Kyverno. The main advantage is that you don't need to write any code to use it, so it's completely configuration driven. And very often you can take an issue in a repo, turn that into a chainsaw test with just a couple of copy-paste manipulations, and you have your new test that makes sure that the bug doesn't happen again, and you can run that in your CI against every PR. So we adopted it first, then other teams from Grafana or other big projects started adopting it too. And then, yeah, today it's evolving. It's evolving depending on the demand and on what we need also for Kyverno. So, for example, not so long ago, we added cell support in Chainsaw because we were working with cell in Kyverno, and it made sense to adopt cell in Chainsaw too.
Very cool. That's super exciting. It seems to be catching a lot of popularity. I've seen folks giving talks about it at different industry events. The Slack channels are quite active. So if you haven't given Chainsaw a try, please do, and then bother Charles Edouard as much as you want about what you'd like to see updated in that repo. We've heard a little bit from Shootin and as well from Miriam about how they see AI playing a role in policies. What about you, Charles Edward? How do you see AI playing a role in the policy space?
Well, I think Shooting and Mariam covered a lot of the things that could happen. To me, I think that AI will help with authoring policies. So probably AI will be a good authoring assistant, like how to turn a document describing governance into something actionable. So you can give it a document and it gives you the corresponding policy. So it will definitely help with authoring, which seems to be useful for technical people, but also for non-technical people. It will probably help non-engineers to write and understand policies. So AI could also explain what a policy is doing. We have the chance that Kyverno is sort of simple enough, but you can go pretty far with a policy, especially now that we added cell support. And cell is almost a complete programming language, so you can do very complicated things with cell. So for a non-engineer, it can be to understand what happens in cell. So we could also imagine that an AI can just explain what a policy is doing to someone that doesn't have any programming background. And then it can change what the AI is explaining. The AI builds the new policy. So it will allow non-engineer people to finally work with policy without having specific technical knowledge. Of course, the changes will be reviewed by engineers and the changes will be tested probably. So it doesn't mean that they will be deployed instantly, but yeah, it can probably help with people working on with different skills. I don't know, maybe people working in a legal team or things like this to build their own policy drafts.
Right. Absolutely. Very, very interesting. Let's hope that happens. Bridging the gap between different departments and people and knowledge bases probably make things better for everyone across the board and kind of unify what people are doing and how they're thinking about things. Before we move on to our next guest and let Jim have a chat with Luke, CNCF graduation. This is something that I know is really important to you. What does that milestone mean to you as we're working toward it, and what are you hoping will happen once the project has actually been graduated?
Well, to me, Kyverno addresses the current challenges we need to solve today in large organizations, large systems. Everyone is pushing to get deployments to production as fast as possible, but everyone at the same time doesn't want to take a risk to get a breach or something like this. It makes sense that we put guardrails and policies in place to prevent misconfigurations and bad surprises. So it's really reminds me the time where service meshes or GitOps were very popular, but not a lot of people had implemented it. It's a bit the same today with policy management and governance. It starts to change, but a lot of people are looking at it, but they don't implement very, very deep policy management in their systems. So some are starting to do it, but it's really just the beginning. So to me, a project like Kyverno was a strong community. It's a project that moves fast. We adopted Cell. We are very interested in making it more flexible, easier to adopt. So it's a great thing that Kyverno will potentially graduate because it solves everything we need to make what everyone wants happen. Because I think everyone wants governance, everyone wants policy. They just don't have the right tool to do it today, or they didn't discover Kyverno yet. But it's like before Argo CD or Flux, everyone wanted to do GitOps, but they didn't know how. And I hope this is what will happen with Kyverno. They want to do policy management and governance, but they don't know how. And with Kyverno, they will succeed in their policy management strategy or migration.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, pretty exciting, and it's great to see the evolution. And as Kubernetes matures, I think it's the right time. So yeah, one thing just to add, so although shooting an AI, like as we mentioned, we were part of the creation of Kyverno. If you look at the recent several releases, probably the one person who's had the biggest impact on the project has been Shalidwa, including like some of the re-architecture, the move towards different policy types, and there's just so many different areas where Shalidwa has contributed and really has started owning and driving the technical architecture and design. So thank you for that, and it's awesome to kind of see the project evolve and mature in this way. And yeah, like how you highlighted how AI is gonna help with that impact of how both for people who are non-engineers also to get involved with some of these technologies.
Yeah, I think it's really an exciting time for policy management, the Kyverno team, and everything around policy as code.
Cool. So yeah, Luke, I know you're one of the newest members of the Kyverno team, but would love to hear your perspective on how you see policy as code shaping our future and where the impacts are.
Yeah, definitely. So hi everyone, I'm Luke. I'm, as Jim said, one of the newest contributor. I joined like a couple months ago, I think. Basically, we are in a place right now where like AI world where everything gets really fast, as other contributors said, but fast in a lot of different ways. Although like in a regulatory ways, like in the laws, sorry. And as Charles-Edouard said, it's really, really important to make proper guardrails around all of that, especially like with everything moving so fast. And Kyverno is just like the tool to do these kinds of things because it brings such simplicity in adding those guardrails, Actually, I started contributing or being interested in Kyverno because I used to use that in my previous experience. And this is exactly the kind of thing we were looking for, like being able to add guardrails in place in a really fast-paced environment. I used to work in a really fast-paced startup before that. And without like any additional code or something like that. And YAML was just the tool we needed. And the fact that we added cell in the last versions bring even more power to that. And yeah, basically we need guardrails in a lot of places, and it's becoming a really like the backbone of the platform, especially in the AI world, because I think Mariam said earlier that it was something that was nice to have, but now it's become a must have. And yeah, given the as you said, like so much code is going to be written in the next few years, policy is going to be mandatory in every single place, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, as you kind of approach Kyverno, like moving from an end user who had, deployed Kyverno, operated clusters with Kyverno, to a contributor, what area of the project did you end up focusing on? And what, again, like also as you look ahead on the roadmap, what is it that excites you most about that?
Yeah, so I'm focusing currently on like new validation policies, but applied to tools like MCP, for example, or A2A, or even agents, like AI agents. Like this is something that is really like I would say, a gray area at the moment, and it's a really fast-moving space. So we are trying to improve the security on that level. I'm also working on the security of the project itself, trying to fix CVEs here and there, discuss with security researchers that brings up new security issues and things like that. And as well as working on the everything about like signing part of Kyverno, signing images, blobs, maybe in the future, like if even like AI models. We are kind of working on that. So all of those three things that are really related to security itself and security like supply chain and things like that.
Very cool. Yeah, I know you casually mentioned this, but something that's quite a big deal. So what you mentioned is that Kyverno will actually be able to be used for agent gateways and MCP governance and other things as well, right? So that's very exciting.
Yeah, definitely. This is something I'm really excited to be working on and have the all the new features that can be done via this new integration with also like the gateway in Kubernetes and things like that. One thing I'm also really interested in, it's a feature that's not come out yet, but the ability to use Kyverno somewhere else than in Kubernetes. We've seen most of the usage in Kubernetes, but with the AI agents, we need or stuff like that, we need to integrate Kyverno to be able to integrate with other tooling and give people the opportunity to use Kyverno outside of just our own interpretation of it. So it's really cool and really excited about this part, about people just taking like a Kyverno SDK and being able to do something else with that on their own way, you know?
That will be cool. Yeah, looking forward to that.
Yeah, same.
Cool. So moving on to Amar and kind of taking off from what Luke was just talking about. I know you've been doing some work on integrating with other tools on all different aspects of the Kyverno repo. Tell us a little bit about your journey into policy as code, what brought you to Kyverno, and what you're currently focusing on right now.
Similar to the other folks, the introduction to policy as code that I went through was through my background as a DevOps or SRE. Because really, when you're in those areas and when you're like discovering the vast CNCF landscape and all the different projects like GitOps and service meshes, and it's not very obvious how some of these projects might help you, and you're wondering how you can integrate them into your workflow. But Kyverno isn't like that at all. You can immediately see what it does and go like, yeah, yes, I need this. This is important. And you start integrating with it. And this very simple notion or this very simple thing that you go through just makes you open your eyes to how big and how impactful a project like this can be to organizations of different scales. So I started out using it in my previous line of work as well. And then when the opportunity presented itself, I also applied to become an LFX mentee. And I was very, very fascinated with the coding practices that were employed in the project and in its actual code. And I became very curious about how can I expand my skills, and how can I build new features into the product, and how can I learn about all the different moving parts in it. And I've contributed to several areas. I think the area that I'm currently focused on is reporting, because this seems to be something very, very important to users, how they report and control their audits to policies, and what are the violations, and how can they get notified of the violations, and the whole ecosystem that exists around reporting.
Yeah, reporting is incredibly important. I think not just for the folks who are creating policies, but then to be able to report to others about what's going on, and the fact that using policies is actually making things better across the board. Having some visibility into the actual process, I think makes it much better for everyone and makes things easier to understand what's going on. So the fact that we have folks who are working on reporting is incredibly important, not just for us, but for our end users as well. It's fantastic, the contributions that you've been making there, not just in our reporting features, but also in the open reports repo, which is part of what we incorporate now. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. The reporting space is still in the making, or it's still taking shape, and the reporting space. And so there are many initiatives and many challenges to be solved in that area. One of those areas is unified reporting across different projects. You want, for example, to not have a type of report for Kyverno and a type of report for Falco. And for every project that you use, there's a new report type that you have to account for and have to manage. So there is an initiative to unify all those reporting APIs into a single one and make it away from like not be integrated with one particular project, but just be like an umbrella type that any project can adopt and start building around. And that is the open reports type. I see this is very, very useful as it gives more projects the ability to integrate reporting features into their code and into their features. And also it makes it easier for administrators and report consumers to consume those reports and do useful things with them, such as the Kyverno Policy Reporter, for example, which has been recently given the ability to use this new open report type. And this means that any new project that decides to adopt this type will have reporting or policy reporting to other data systems such as Slack, S3, or many other integrations be available to them because yes, Policy Reporter already supports this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And yeah, very, very fast moving space as well, with many new things being introduced all the time.
Yeah, things seem to be accelerating at an incredible pace, and not just because of AI, but because of people like all of you who are here who work incredibly hard to keep up with all the needs of community. One final question for you, Amar. As things evolve at such a fast pace, and especially for the Kyverno project that's integrating with different tools and projects, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges ahead for our maintainer team as well as for contributors who are out there?
I think one of the biggest challenges that face us as maintainers and face the contributors team is the ever expanding scope. It seems that because Kyverno, of course, has established itself as the one of the very leading engines in policy as code, it's getting a very, very huge user base, and those user base come with a lot of demands that tailor to their organizations and tailor to their use case, and they want to see their features integrated. So more and more feature requests and more code to maintain will be added at an increasing speed, of course, also because of AI. And this definitely becomes a challenge for the maintainer team on what policy, what features to prioritize, how to implement a feature and have a long-term plan of how to maintain this feature and how to also have a plan for deprecating old features so that other users who are already using this don't get impacted. Definitely requires a lot of effort on the maintainers team and opens the chance for contributors to come in and help, because of course help is always needed with these kinds of things. So yeah, I think the biggest challenge that the maintainers face is the ever increasing speed of new feature requests coming from the community as it expands.
Yeah, thank you, Amar. I appreciate that, and great insights into some of the trends that we're seeing. So Frank, Amar mentioned, Policy Reporter briefly and open reports, but you were the one who started Policy Reporter as sort of a side project, and then it became part of Kyverno, and now it's, kind of evolving into open reports. So would love to hear, how you feel about that and a little bit about your story with Kyverno and how you got involved.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jim. So, yeah, short introduction. I'm Frank. I'm living in Germany and working at Nirmata for a year now, maybe some months more. I think it's almost 4 years, so maybe a bit more. When I really just started with learning Kyverno and this space around it. So from a working background, I started more as a back-end developer in basic application development, so web technologies like PHP, JavaScript and stuff. So not really the features related to a Kubernetes DevOps engineer or something. And yeah, I think I saw a presentation about Kyverno from Jim and Shooting these days, and their really new reporting system. And yeah, like it's for Kubernetes, it's a CRD. You can use it like a CRD. But in my opinion, and I recently worked with the Falco communities at this time, it was really hard for me to get an understanding how you want to use the CRDs in a really large environment with a lot of reports, a lot of namespaces. You have to grab, you have to combine, you have to analyze your findings. So what or how should a user getting into a policy engine these days get into reporting when it's so hard to use a CRD and there was no support or UI or something for it? And like it started as a stupid idea to just build something. So we have tooling for reporting. We have Grafana, we had a Loki. So there are many tools which helps with this, but you need to get your CRDs somehow into the systems. And this was the idea behind Policy Reporter, started as my personal project. So it really begins as a kind of bridge between the Kyverno CRDs and the Loki and Grafana. So it reads your CRDs, it writes in a different structure and exports them into your monitoring system as Prometheus metrics, for example. And then you really have something to see. You can build your summaries, you can build some graphs, you can group them by namespace, by resource as you like. And this was my really start into the Kubernetes area itself, not only Kyverno. And the idea got some good feedback, and then something evolved very quickly. So it was one of my first open source projects, and it really evolved. So we started to support more systems. We started to using it for alerting systems, for write or send alerts to your basic chat clients like Slack, Discord, and so on, Microsoft Teams, I think. And I think I had then my first interview on a Everyone Can Contribute channel, I think what's called, from DNS Michi from GitLab, I think he works. And there we had the discussion if it was designed for Kyverno, why not moving it to Kyverno? And then we got more and more in touch. And I think some weeks or months later, I joined the Kyverno organization for as a maintainer of the Policy Reporter side project. So this was like my story began. And I also started then contributing to Kyverno from time to time, mostly in the reporting area, as some of my features needed some changes or improvements on the Kyverno side. And if I have the chance to do it myself, so why not using it? That's how open source works. And this was the start of our collaboration. And recently I started then at Nirmata as a senior backend developer, and now I'm even more into the Kyverno project itself and starting working on it directly.
It's very cool. We had to ask Frank several times, to join us. So I'm glad you finally did, and very excited to have you as part of course, Kyverno as well as Nirmata. So as you started with the reporting subsystem. Obviously, you kind of build that from scratch, and I love how you were low key about you got some feedback, and what Frank means by some feedback is like thousands of organizations using this in production and lots of bugs, lots of activity, which Frank has been really on top of and managing and maintaining. Thank you again for that. But as you look ahead in Kyverno, what's your role now, and which areas are you working on, and what are you most excited about in terms of what's coming up?
So I'm still a bit on the reporting side. I'm also worked recently on the observability of Kyverno itself by getting into which metrics Kyverno itself exposing, how can we improve them, what details we need to add for our new policy types. I also started my first work on my first CRD, the deleting policy, which is one of our new cell-based policy types, where I started to get into cell, how to extend cell. And I'm really looking forward how the adoption of these new types will be, what use cases face limitations, how we can solve these limitations, and how we can find ways to support people and users to move from our old system to these new CRDs, also with the help of AI, for example. So really looking forward how the adoption will be, and how we can continue to improving the policy simplicity. for our end users.
Absolutely. So what do you see as the most exciting thing with AI coming and its involvement in policies?
Yeah, as mentioned, it will help for users to move the engine. So many users started with an engine just to have one, to get started into this area, but maybe later they see, okay, we have a system and it basically works, but it could be better. We would move to another one like Kyverno, but we have so many policies in place how to get from one engine to another engine. And I think features like AI will help to make the decision easier for users, to really help to move from one to another, so that users more free to change between engines if they see limitations in some way. Also we are in the time of vibe coders, and policies really help to secure this kind of applications in some way and limiting how bad it could be. So I think this is also an area where AI can really help. So yeah, it's really a tool also for newcomers to get into this topic, to make it easier to adopting it, and yeah, it will help to try things out.
Great. This has been fantastic. Jim, I am so glad that you've been pushing to do a podcast and that this is our first episode. What a unique and super interesting group of people. We do have a handful of maintainers that weren't able to make it today, but they are just as diverse and interesting and unique. And I think this is a perfect episode to start with because it really does show not just how policy can unify different people, but it really is a global interest. We have a global team of maintainers here, all coming from very different points in time in their careers and interests and backgrounds, who have joined this project to maintain it and move it forward. And that is an ode to open source, but also to the importance and the actual way that policy as code should be a cornerstone as we move forward in the world of platform engineering, in the world of software development for SREs like Amar. I think we also have some really, really amazing journey stories from mentee to mentor to maintainer on our team. So this seems like a perfect first podcast episode. So I'd really like to thank everyone for joining us. What are your thoughts, Jim, as we wrap up here? We heard a lot about not just policy and how folks have gotten involved in this project, but also about AI, which is where we're headed. We all know this. What are your closing thoughts for today?
Yeah, I'm very excited, and thanks for organizing and hosting. And something that really strikes me is we all know Kubernetes is now 10 years old, right? So 10 years of Kubernetes, and that first decade was really all about people getting involved with a new way of deploying, operating, maintaining workloads on what's become almost like the de facto operating system, if you want to call it that, across cloud providers, edge, and data centers. But the next 10 years are going to be, I think, even more exciting, right? This is where not only will we be running the world's most mission critical and most sort of important infrastructure, but also, like, if you look at the stats, about 80% plus of all AI projects, whether it's model training, whether it's model inference, whether it's new agents, all of those are getting built on top of Kubernetes, right? And this is the exact sort of perfect storm of things which requires projects like Kyverno for policy governance and to make sure that we can scale Kubernetes to this next for the next 10 years. So very excited, and definitely looking forward to future episodes of this podcast and also KyvernoCon, both the virtual and physical ones, and then future episodes. Would love to kind of hear from not only other maintainers and contributors, but also some of our end user community, because we have a very diverse set of end users as well. So super excited to stay tuned for that.
Absolutely. That's another thing we should highlight. And so many of our maintainers here today actually showed up because they were end users. And that's how they found this
Right.
project. So very excited for for our upcoming episodes. We've got some very interesting folks lined up. We'll be recording those in the upcoming weeks and welcoming guests from around the world to speak about their experience with Kyverno, with AI, with platform engineering, with all of these things put together. So please stay tuned and follow us for more Policy Bites. Thanks, everyone.